Good afternoon, everyone. Super excited to join Keri from the Marshall Project. As a Marshall Project board member, I am super excited for this conversation, so I cannot wait in order to join this conversation, especially right now in this week, thinking about food equity, thinking about just how we're treated in prison during these COVID times. Oh, and I believe Keri's here. Hey, Keri.
Hey,
How are
hey.
you?
Sorry, you got some light going on here in the background. Let me see if I can do anything about that. Not really. Okay, sorry. That's just the room I'm in. There's a lot of light. This is not my house. It's a very nice house. It is not my house.
Are you sure?
Yo, being in prison did not teach me to decorate a place like this. Okay? Like, oh my God. The whole thing is just, this place is great. But
So wait
I
a
did
minute.
not
Where are
anticipate the
you?
light.
You don't have to say the who, but where are you?
Oh, I'm at my friend's house in Austin. I've been here, I live in Austin or in Houston, but I've been,
Right.
my quarantine pod is in Austin because it was just terrible trying to do all of this alone. So so I came up here and I've been hanging out with two of my friends here for I don't know, I've been here since like August. So
Really?
yeah.
I was thinking about coming down to Texas, actually. People think I'm a little crazy with traveling, but I'm like, to me, it's safer now than it's ever been, because everyone is scared of traveling. So nobody's really traveling and everybody has to wear a mask. And most of the time you have to be tested for COVID. So, that's my logic. But I mean, thank God I have the antibodies.
Oh,
So
I didn't know
apparently,
that.
yeah, I've been exposed, but I didn't get any symptoms. And I've been tested 3 times since March and
Okay.
because of travel. But each time I've been negative, but positive for the antibodies. So I guess the theory around having antibodies and them going away, I don't know if that's actually true. So,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, maybe it varies by person too, because I also know people that, like, I know a lot of people in prison that got reinfected, right? But I
Mm,
mean, I would assume that means they didn't, the antibodies didn't last for them.
true.
But that makes so much more sense why I see you traveling all the time. I was like, yo, this girl is everywhere.
I know at first I was like, I have the antibodies. I'm saving lives. I'm donating blood, But then
Okay,
I
this
chilled
makes a
out
lot
for
more sense.
a little bit.
But yeah, you
It-
should totally come to Texas. It's so warm here. Like, I don't know how people are dealing with, quarantine and all the isolation in like the Northeast. I mean, obviously, I lived there for most of my life, but I did
Mhm.
not try to quarantine there. It seems
Right.
like it's just so awful right now.
Yeah,
So
you're
I'm
right.
very glad, even though there's so many cases here, I'm very glad to be someplace where it's like warm and I
Hmm.
can go outside and we can, have, socially distanced drinks on the balcony or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's too cold for that in here up New York, but they're trying. But
Yeah.
I'm so happy to see you. Thank you so much. You're
Good to
just
see you again.
I know you're
Yeah.
just dope anyway. But when I found out that you were writing for the Marshall Project now, I was like, Carrie, that's my girl. As you know, I'm on the board. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah, we talk about you often. But
Remember we talked about this. Oh, and you know what? When I ended up like first talking with the Marshall Project about working here was actually on pop-up tour when we met.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Wow.
that was some of them in when I was hanging out in New York. So I guess we should tell the viewers what we're talking about. Topeka and I both did pop-up magazine tour last year. It was very cool, on stage performances of we both did prison related performance pieces, I guess would be the best word for it. And that was when we first met in person. And
Yeah.
we were talking about whether the Marshall Project would have any openings. And you were like, I'm sure they will eventually. Do you
And
remember
look at,
that?
I
Do you remember
absolutely do.
that?
Yes. And I remember, I believe you're the first formerly incarcerated writer, right, on staff?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I was the first formerly incarcerated board member. So look at Marshall Project. And we're both women.
Yeah.
Hey. So, so it's all good. We always are the first, thank God, nowadays. But yeah, so we were talking about just traveling, but the serious conversation is about
Food.
prison and food
Yeah.
and Corona. And so, just to give a little bit about who you are, um, Keri's a staff writer for the Marshall Project, whose work focused on prisons and prosecutors. She previously covered criminal justice for Houston Chronicle, and her work has appeared in the Washington Post magazine, Vice, the New York Daily News, and NBC News. She is the organization's first formerly incarcerated reporter. Her memoir about her experience of incarceration will be released by St. Martin's Press in early 2022. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, you know what? I guess this was probably after we met, like a little bit after I signed a book deal. And, it's been going a little slower than it should have because I did get a little bit derailed by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely a few months where I was like, I'm not working on anything. Life is meaningless. We're all going to die.
No.
Seriously, that was like me in like March, April, May.
Oh my God.
Like I finally got my shit together in like June, July, and started working on it
Okay,
again.
cool.
But it's coming along very well. Like I think it's really good. It's coming along slower than I would have hoped, but I think it's coming out really well. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think it'll be a good read out.
Right. So in May, you published an article titled "Ew, what is that?" I remember saying that so many times when I was inside.
Right?
About food in the Texas. Oh my gosh, in the Texas prisons during the pandemic, right? And so, can you tell us why you chose to focus on Texas? But before you do that, I remember being in the county jail in Virginia, Pamunkey Regional Jail, to be exact. And I remember the trays. And when I read your article, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I remember this is in 2012. And I remember getting these trays and the mystery meat. It was like green, colors of blue. It was supposed to be bologna. You would get like 8 pieces of that. You would get 8 pieces of white bread, normally stale or molded. You would get milk that was in a little pouch that was powdered milk. So you shook it and then it turned into milk. And then it would, a lot of times that was out of date. You would be lucky if you got a piece of fruit. And then they gave you this little hard cake that was like a square this big. And this was your meal every single day, 7 days a week. And when I read your article, I was like, oh my God, it was such a flashback for me. And that was Virginia. So tell me why Texas?
So I mean, I'm in Texas, obviously, and I have pretty well sourced in Texas prisons. But in this case, it was just like I mean, I've been hearing these complaints for years. Like I've seen what food is like in jails and prisons, and it's just so hard to prove. When somebody writes you and they say I was only given X, Y, and Z, or this was moldy or whatever, like it's really hard to prove. And it's also the sort of thing that I think is just not as compelling unless you have a visual for people, right? Mm-hmm. And I just happened to, because I'm in Texas and because I'm well sourced in Texas, like this happened to be the place where I started to be able to get a hold of pictures of the food. If I had gotten pictures like sent from an Ohio prison, I would have, we would have published those and I would have written about that. But
makes sense.
I got the Texas pictures. So, that's why we ended up, publishing that. So I did get some pictures out of federal prisons too, but those were really inconsistent. Like some of them weren't terrible and then some of them were, whereas like the Texas prisons, it was pretty consistent in the units that were on lockdown that it was, generally kind of subpar, at best, and like ridiculously terrible at worst. And part of the thing here is that, like, obviously Texas, like anywhere else, like they get some amount of warm meals if they're not on lockdown. But the issue is they're on lockdown, which they put so many of these units on like prolonged, like weeks long, months long lockdowns during the pandemic. When they're on lockdown, they just give them bagged lunches, which they call Johnnies, like, Johnny Sacks. And those are where the food gets really dicey. That's where you have like the green hot dogs, and some of those pictures are of just really unidentifiable things.
Yeah.
Like there's one that's like it's like a piece of bread with what purports to be a sloppy Joe, but is like, it's like a little, I don't know, it looks like somebody had like diarrhea on the bread, like it's just like some little brown crap in the middle. And there's that, and then there were some hot dogs, there were some hamburgers that were highly questionable. And there's one picture that was not in that story that I got sent later of someone's meal that was a hot dog in a tortilla with a whole uncooked, like, raw potato. Like, so
And it's like, I laugh not because it's funny, because I've lived it, right? You've lived
because
it.
what else are you gonna do?
So it's like, what, and it's like, what in the world, like, how is this even still happening, with even the movement around changing conditions of confinement? And the fact that, yes, we're looking at what's happening now because of coronavirus, and to your point, extended periods of time in lockdown. But we also know a lot of these local jails and prisons, they just do what they want anyway. And so when that happens, they won't let people out. And when I was in Warsaw, for example, we were locked in a unit, and they served the trays through a little slot
Right.
that actually was in the larger unit, because the unit we were in, they had bunk beds, about 14 to 20 bunk beds, and they slid the tray through that. So we're still in these conditions, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm like, I know that these prisons, we're going to talk Texas, were bad before. But now, like, when would you say that they turned worse? The food.
Well, I'd say I started getting complaints in like April or so. And I mean, mind you, there's 100 prisons in Texas at this point, and there were 104 at that point. So there's a lot of variability, right? Some units didn't go on lockdown for very long, or like not at all. Whereas, some units have been on lockdown for months. And the issue was, like, it wasn't even so much just the lockdown and the fact that you would get the bagged meals during lockdown. It was that they were also not allowed to go to commissary. Or when they did let them go to commissary, they give them like a restricted $10 or $15 spend. And, and that's like, okay, you don't have phones, so you have to use that on like stamps and, probably some hygiene and stuff.
Right.
And so then when you can't like supplement the bad food you're getting, that's when people started really complaining. So I started hearing a lot of this in like April, and then started, getting pictures in like, late April, early May. And I mean, I've continued getting pictures throughout, for months since then. Although I will say that after that story ran, like a week after that story ran, prison officials said in a phone call with some of the family advocacy organizations that they were working to try to improve the food, that they were going to provide some amount of like vegetables or fruit, because the only fruit in that was prunes in any of those pictures, or prunes and some raisins, and there was no vegetables. And the only green thing that I got any picture of before the story ran was like the hot dogs that were kind of questionable.
You said the only green thing was a hot dog, which was not a veggie hot dog. It was a moldy hot dog.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, after that ran, then they started saying that they were going to improve the food, that they ordered like 40,000 trays or something with lids, like, so they could actually deliver hot food. And there's been some mixed results on that. Like I have had people sending me pictures of like broccoli and what else? Like broccoli and a banana. One dude sent me a picture of a banana, and he was so thrilled about this damn banana. Like, I've never seen anyone so happy about a banana, right? So yeah, I've started getting updates with, vegetables and some, some hot meals. But then, I mean, I'm still getting, like, this was only probably 2 months ago that I got that picture with the tortilla and the hot dog. So, like, some places they're still having, they're still having terrible food months into this.
And, just to think now, people are locked in, they can't go outside even. So there's no fresh air. We're talking about in the middle of this pandemic, people, there's no way you can social distance in prison. And then, on top of this, they're cutting budgets, and they're cutting more budgets, but the budgets that they're cutting around food, right? And so not only are you subjecting people to this pandemic, and they're getting strict with illness, they're not getting the proper medical health care that they need. They're not getting a nutritious meal even through that. They're cutting budgets and food, and then they're also cutting meals, I read. Can you share a little bit more, like what's happening around that?
Yeah, so the budget cuts regarding food in Texas anyways were in like around 2011, I think. That was a really tough budget year here. And one of the ways that they decided to save money, was to combine some of the meals at some of the facilities. This wasn't all of them, but at some of them they were combining breakfast and lunch, which, is not uncommon in prison. I mean, in New York, we got brunch, which was I mean, they make it sound special, but it's really just like they give you the same foods, just, at once.
Right.
We would get that on like weekends and holidays. So, so it's not like this is unprecedented. I
Mm-hmm.
just, it's just like, I feel like in the free world, we can have brunch and it's fun, and you can have, drink or whatever, and you can have a snack later. And that's, I think people forget that when they say, oh, but we do brunch in the free world and everyone is fine. But it's very different in prison, because you're eating at such weird times is the other thing. I mean, it's just not a sort of eating schedule that people are used to. And and when you only feed someone twice a day, and it's subpar food to begin with, and there's not enough, like that's just not adequate. But in any case, they made that change in like 2011ish, and at the same time they got rid of like any vaguely fancy bread, by which I mean like a hot dog bun. They got rid of like hot dog buns and hamburger buns, and just replaced them
Mm-hmm.
with bread and apparently tortillas in some cases. Which, it's again, like, I mean, I get how this sounds in theory if you're the legislator sort of thinking this through, like, well, maybe a hamburger bun's not a big deal, but like when you actually see this like green hot dog wrapped in like a single piece of white bread, like it looks pretty inadequate.
Mm-hmm. It's more than looks, it is, right? Like, and we know it because
Yeah.
I remember like vividly what that experience was like. And like I could not believe, and it was like when I ended up going from the county jail into the federal prison. First I had to go through what was that, the transfer center in Oklahoma. And
Oh,
the
okay, yeah.
food, yeah, and the food was very much the same. I went into Grady County one trip, and then into the Federal Transfer Center another. So that was, the conditions outside of just the food. And I think about the brothers and sisters inside now, just remembering that experience during that time. But then when I got to Danbury, it was different. But again, it was because in Danbury, it was the officer who did, Mr. Kennel. Shout out to Mr. Kennel. I know he is on social media too. But Mr. Kennel, he would order food for the women to cook, like the right things. Like we had a salad bar at times, and we had those different things. I remember Thanksgiving. Well, Thanksgiving, the county jail, they gave us some like sliced turkey cold cuts with gravy. Also, think about sandwich meat. So a turkey sandwich meat, and they put gravy on top of that, with like green beans, some half cooked potatoes. It was like, when I got to Danbury that next year, I completely cried because I was like, wow, this is beautiful. And I could actually tell it was because of the officer. Like, the fact that he really cared about the population there. Like we had all type turkey, it was ham, it was regular greens, it was vegan greens, it was, I mean, all kinds of cakes and pies. The women made a cornucopia. I mean, it was like a more beautiful spread than I probably have seen outside, right? But that was because of the love and the care that the women put into it, but then also the officer ordering whatever that the sisters wanted to cook for that year. When I got to Greenville, Illinois, it went back to the tray. I think at this point, it wasn't the cold cut, it was sliced turkey on a tray with gravy. But it was, again, this. And then, as I think about the trays, every time I visit a prison and I see those trays, I get nauseous. Like, I may not even smell the food because it has this distinct scent, but it's also even looking at it, how it just, like, the recycling of these trays that have been there like for decades. The fact that, to your point, the mold and things aren't actually being cleaned properly. You have machines that are down sometimes. You don't have the proper sanitation. And, while thinking about COVID and actually bringing these things up, that if you're not sanitizing things appropriately and you're sliding things in closed spaces into doors, how do you think, again, this is another way that the virus continues to spread? And so I know that in certain prisons that people rely on food packages. I know in New York, upstate, we've sent packages and also to people who are presently incarcerated where they can have food. Do you know what's happening around that with the pre-approved packages for food now during COVID, especially?
I don't know in New York, actually. I mean, I haven't heard any reports of any like interruptions to the food packages. I mean, I know that the rules as to what you can have changed since when I was in there. And I know that like they were always like some of those rules were always real crazy. But Texas, you can't get food packages like that.
Mm-hmm.
So so these guys that are in Texas prisons don't have that. Don't have that as an option. And also going back to you were talking about Thanksgiving in prison, and I actually had I had a sort of similar experience. I was only in prison for one Thanksgiving because I did a little under 2 years, and I got arrested between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So I ended up being in for one Thanksgiving, and that year. So I was dating someone, and they came to visit. And so I had a visit, and I was very excited. And we made a Thanksgiving meal out of like Reese's peanut butter cups and Snickers that we bought out of the vending machine. And we like carved the words like mashed potato on the back and like pretended it was like a meal. And it's like funny and it's sad, but like I was so excited, And then I went back to the unit, and I was and I actually have an essay about this that I think we're publishing on the Marshall Project tomorrow, just about Thanksgiving in prison then and sort of what it's like for people now. But at the time, I was on this terrible unit, and like there was just fights in the bathroom all the time, and like it was like the creepy guards that would like be watching you change and giving disciplinary tickets for wearing pajamas after 9 a.m. and shit like that. And like it was just not a good place to be even with the realm of prison. And that day we had like the one good guard, and he came in and he saw this one group of this one like little Mean Girls clique, basically like monopolizing the hot plates, because we had these shared hot plates in the common area, and you could sort of try to cook or like warm stuff up on the hot plates. And he saw them like monopolizing it and only making food for like their little group of friends. And he was like, no, you can't do that. Like this is Thanksgiving, and if you're going to cook, you've got to include everyone. So then the whole dorm, this is 60 women, pitched in. And, I pretty much lived on canned peas at that point. That was like my primary food group, like twice a day. So I put in some canned peas and, and everybody donated stuff. And, and you couldn't have spices. So some of it was stuff that was smuggled in or like stolen from the mess hall. Like you would buy cinnamon by the fingerful because you'd have a strip search glove, and you'd buy it like one finger of cinnamon would be whatever, one pack of Newports or, whatever the trade was at the time. Because Newports were, at least then, the currency in New York prisons. So, we bought like, smuggled in spices, and everybody put in this food and made this just amazing meal. Like it was good. It was, there was like beans, there was all these salads, there was yams, there was turkey. There was, you know, really good mac and cheese. There was like several kinds of cakes and baked goods. And it's one of those things that, like, looking back, I'm like, did that legit, like, really happen? Did we
Yeah.
really do that? But, like, we totally did. And, you know, nobody fought that day. And I mean, it was, you know, the next day shit went back to normal. People were fighting in the bathroom. Like, it went back, you know, but it was just like, it was this one day. And, you know, and when I think about that, when I think back on it, I think of, like, you know, that's like where change starts, right? It's like one day at a time. You know, it's where, like, when people start to, like, turn their lives around, when you start to see redemption, it doesn't happen and just stick for good.
Right.
It's like a little moment here and there. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that is really easy to not see the value of and just sort of be like, whatever, a bunch of inmates ate, you know? But, like, it's so much more than that. Like, this is about people learning to make the best of what is an unequivocally bad situation, being in prison without your family. And most of these people are mothers, you know, and this is a holiday. And it's also about, you know, like, learning to get along with some of these people who you don't respect in some cases, who just are nasty to you and hate you. And I just feel like, that's such a step towards being a different person and towards learning redemption and seeing change. And, you know, I look back on that as just one of these sort of, like, rare moments of change that you see in prison, where you can look at one specific moment and be like, that meant something.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. I was talking earlier about how when I was, you know, thinking about this conversation, I learned, and, you know, people don't laugh, but I learned how to actually make and clean greens in Danbury, right? Like, I didn't even know how to do it, but it's to your point, that community, right? You know, and that no matter where you are, you can find family, you can find community, you can build community. And that experience for me for Thanksgiving in Danbury Federal Prison Camp was really, really impactful and powerful, because I said, you know what, I'm not going to go to this kitchen. I don't feel like it. I miss my family. You know, it's the first time I'm away from my family again. This was after my sentence, because I did the first year in the county jail before I was sentenced, which was my first Thanksgiving. I did 3 inside. But that second one, when I got there, I just could not believe just how beautiful it was. People were like, no, you need to come. And then it was like the expectation when I got to Greenville that it would be the same, because I'm like, okay, we're at a camp and it's the same. They're going to do the same thing. And they didn't. And then it also allowed me to see even the humanity of the guards, right? Of the correction officers during those different times. Because even while they're there, and the fact that they understand that people, again, these are hard seasons, you know, when you're away from your family. But to think now, you know, I was going to go visit one of my family members in prison on Thanksgiving Day and found out that the prisons, they just shut the business down. And I'm like, what? You know, it just shocked me, because just last week, my you know, other family members were able to go visit. And I just was like, I can't believe that now, during the holiday, in the middle of a global pandemic, when the visits were already just behind the glass for 30 minutes anyway, that now they shut it down even more. And so, you know, it's just my hope that even during these times, when we know that the numbers are spiking out here, that also means that the numbers are going to spike again in there. It's my hope that we'll be really able to continue to pass legislation that gets people out. You know, that we can begin to, like they just recently did in New Jersey, you know, gave people early release who had under a year left in their sentence, that more state governors will do that around the country to provide opportunities for people to be out and with their families. And that they will have proper PPE and proper things. And people will have an opportunity to share community in this time, and won't just be locked in their cells and fed with a tray through a slot. And so is there anything else that you'd like to add for our viewers right now?
No, I mean, you know, I keep thinking a lot about how, you know, you're talking about, like, hoping that they are not just getting fed in, you know, through the slots. And I keep thinking about like so many of the things that made prison survivable have disappeared over the past few months during the pandemic. And I mean, I know that everyone on the outside is struggling with these sorts of things too, but I just keep thinking like prison's just so hard to begin with. And um, during a holiday, like there are people that are gonna be locked in and getting food, you know, through a slot that wouldn't have been otherwise. Like not there because they were, you know, ADSEG or solitary or whatever. And it just makes me sad because I feel like there's going to be so many fewer of those moments like you and I were talking about, those, you know, those sorts of special like moments when everyone can come together in community. And you know, I've been thinking about that a lot. You know, I'm always, you know, obviously this is a hard holiday for everyone, you know, on the outside.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people aren't seeing family and, you know, you're canceling Friendsgiving or like whatever you do to get by in the holidays. Like, you know, you're probably not. And, you know, but for me, I also like the holidays is when I'm always sort of most grateful that I'm not inside counting down days until I'm out. And when I'm, you know, most grateful that I'm able to tell the stories of the people who are still there and still doing that. And this year it feels like a lot of those stories are just really sad.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about, you know, my friends and sources on the inside, and, you know, hoping that, you know, they're out here not counting down the days sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I would agree. So, you know, thank you again, Keri, for taking the time out and seeing you again. I'm so happy about that. I'm glad that you are in your pod with your peeps and that you're safe. And if I make my way, when I make my way to Texas, I have some peeps down that way too. I definitely will be looking for you.
Yeah, hit me up.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely make sure people come get your book, right? In 2022, that's coming. Your memoir. So I'll be excited. I want an autographed copy, please.
Of course.
Okay, good. And, you know, please donate to the Marshall Project. You know, definitely subscribe if you're not a subscriber to the Marshall Project. Critical News, definitely holding a space around issues that harm and support incarcerated people and families. And, you know, follow us at Blades of Hope Ministries. Keri, what's your personal social?
My Twitter is at KERIBLA, and my Instagram is just Keri Blakinger.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you. It was so great to see you. Have a great week of gratitude.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.